Okay, Finding Zasha, Chapter 7. Now we left off where Ivan had to realize that he was preparing to leave to go live with his uncle Boris, and Auntie would be going with him for a part of the way, yet his mother had to continue working in her factory in a different location up in the Ural Mountains, I think. So, okay, Chapter 7. 2 days later, I went upstairs with Auntie to help her pack for our trip across the frozen lake. "Where are your table and chairs?" I asked, startled by the empty space in her kitchen. "We use them for fuel, Ivan," she said, unlocking the front door of her apartment behind us. "You mean Auntie had been doing all the cooking for us on the wood-burning stove? I hadn't stopped to notice where the wood came from. It hit me that even with the war and rationing, I still took a lot of things for granted." "Thank you," I murmured. "I don't know how we would have gotten along without you." She smiled. "And don't worry, I remembered to take the money out of the table legs before I burned them." "Any surprises for me today?" I called as Auntie disappeared into the tiny hallway between the bedroom and the living area. "Maybe a few," she called from the bedroom. I followed her when I heard the scraping sound of something being dragged across the floor. Auntie was pulling a chair from the bedroom toward the hall. "Let me," I said, taking it over for her. "Where do you want it?" "In front of the closet in the hall." I carried it the few feet that separated us from the closet and opened the door. "Can you reach the basket on the top shelf?" "Of course." I stepped up onto the chair and carefully removed a covered basket the size of a suitcase. It was surprisingly light. "Where do you want it?" "Hand it to me." Auntie took it and carried it into the living room. "What are you looking for?" I asked, joining her. "Some things that belong to my husband." I studied Auntie Vera's face to find the young woman underneath the ancient one I knew, trying to picture her with her husband, a man who had died long, long ago. I peered over her shoulder into the deep basket. "Valenki!" I exclaimed as she held up a pair of the dark gray felt boots. They were Arseni's. She gazed at them with a half smile, barely worn. "Here." She held them out to me. "What do you want me to do with them?" "Keep them, of course." As she continued emptying out the basket, I said, "I can't accept them, Auntie. It's too big a present." "Nonsense. A pair of perfectly good boots is going to waste. You'll need them when we cross Lake Ladoga, and especially when you go up to your uncle's place. They might be a little big for you." "Try them on." Valenki were traditional Russian boots, made out of felt, worn mostly by country people. They kept your feet warm even in the coldest temperatures. They weren't waterproof, so you had to wear galoshes over them, but Valenki were so sturdy and invaluable that people were known to pass them down from one generation to the next. All the Soviet soldiers were issued Valenki with their winter gear, or their feet wouldn't have lasted through one of our winters. Many hoped that the lack of Valenki alone would defeat the Germans once they experienced the severity of our winters. The severity and cold of our winters, I think, huh? Much colder than what we've experienced even. I'd never owned a pair because we lived in the city. I only went outside in the winter to play with Alik and Misha or run errands for my mother. If my feet got cold, I would soon be indoors again, drying off in front of the stove. I slipped my shoes off and cautiously put the first one on and then the other foot into the other Valenki. They came almost up to my knees. Auntie nodded. "A little big, perhaps. Wear them with a few pair of heavy socks until you grow into them." I walked around the room to get a feel for them. Arseny had worn them enough that they weren't stiff and hard as I had heard they were when they were new. Looking up at Auntie with a smile, I said, "With these, I think our journey won't be as hard." She threw me a pair of black rubber galoshes. "Put these on over them when you use them outside." I caught one in each hand and slipped them easily over what were quickly feeling like my Valenki. "Thank you, Auntie. But are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. Take good care of them. You'll be with your Uncle Boris soon, and then a new chapter of your life will be opening for you." For the first time, I left myself feel a little curious about what it would be like to live in the country, even if it was with my Uncle Boris. If only I weren't being separated from my mother, I might actually feel excited about it. "I thought it was in here," Auntie murmured as she emptied the last of the contents on the sofa. "What?" "The knife." "What What knife? Oh, yes, she said brightly and disappeared into her bedroom. She reappeared with a shoebox, its lid gone, stuffed with an old pair of weathered-looking men's work boots. She took them out of the box, set them aside, pulled back a piece of fabric to reveal two slender knives with plain wooden handles, sheathed in brown leather. She held one out to me, handle first. I stared at it and then at her. Take it. The smooth wood-covered handle slipped easily into my hand and fit well. It's Finnish. That's from Finland, she said, pulling out the other, holding it, turning it over. This one's a little smaller and I'll keep it. You take that one. For what? Everything, she said, looking surprised at my question. Protection, cutting branches for fire, gutting fish. You can't go to the country, especially on your own, without one of these. Auntie Vera sometimes felt to me like she was a magician, pulling endless rabbits out of her hat. So, I said, glancing down at my new boots, you think we'll be crossing Ladoga soon? She looked at me, held my gaze, and said yes. If we don't, it's more likely than not we will die. I knew she was right. The words hardly surprised me. There wasn't a moment I wasn't hungry. It was rumored that thousands of people were starving to death every day. Hardly any of my friends wanted to sled or play like we used to. Everyone was too weak from hunger. We were all using our energy just to stay alive. It's my turn to get our rations today, I said. I should go. It was the last thing I wanted to do. Waste hours in a long line in the cold afternoon air. The forecast was for snow by nightfall. At least I had new boots to keep my feet warm. I left Auntie's apartment feeling lucky and proud of my new Valenki, even if I did walk a little clumsily because they were too big for me. After stopping in our apartment to get our ration cards, I went next door to see if Alik and Misha would go with me. They still didn't lock their door in spite of Auntie's warnings. I found them lying on their unmade bed in the living room playing chess. Do you want to see me? Checkmate, Misha? Let me try that again. Do you want to see me checkmate Misha? Alik asked, glancing up at me. He hasn't a clue it's coming. I do too, Misha protested, and I'm sick of chess anyway. He began putting the pieces back in their box without waiting for Alik's consent. I have to get bread today. Do you want to go with me? I asked before the brothers could break into a squabble about their game. They agreed, and soon we were out walking as a light snow flurries floated down around us. 3 blocks later, we turned the corner and saw a line that stretched an entire block from the storefront where we received our ration of bread. We took our place at the end of it. Not 2 minutes had gone by when we heard a scream from somewhere near the front of the store. We ran toward it. 2 teenage boys, one with a knife in his hand, were trying to steal the purse of a woman who looked like she was Auntie's age. Of course, it contained her ration card. She laced her hands together, her purse in the crook of her arm, and kept turning away from the boy who was trying to take it from her. The boy with the knife in his hand yelled repeatedly to the rest of us, "Don't try to help," as he swung his weapon in a wide arc. And no one tried to help, including us, because it was too dangerous. We all stared in horror as the unarmed boy became more and more frustrated that he'd been unable to wrestle the purse from the tiny old woman. He kept threatening to do terrible things to her if she didn't let go. Finally, 3 women from inside the bread store rushed out, each one carrying some sort of wooden stick, broom handles maybe, and began to hit the boy assaulting the old woman. The boy with the knife ran away as soon as they began to hit his friend. The other boy soon followed after receiving a few good blows from the brave woman at the bread shop. As they brought the frightened old woman into the store, one of them turned to address the crowd who'd been watching the drama unfold. "We are so sorry," she said. "We have to close the shop until we've spoken to the authorities." She quickly closed the door. No one said a word. No one moved. I stared at the long line of people, almost all women and a few children our age, and realized even more deeply that hunger now governed everything. No one had the strength to fight the thieving boys or to argue with the woman who closed the shop. Our bread rations meant another day of survival, and none of us could afford to risk losing it. That's tough, huh? I wonder what happens now in chapter 8. They kept standing there. Through her connections at the Kyoto factory, my mother had secured a place for me and Auntie on the first convoy of trucks that would cross the ice road over Lake Ladoga. We would leave at 5 a.m. We planned a special farewell dinner for our last night together and invited Alik, Misha, and their mother to join us. Soup and bread was what we ate at every meal, but on this night, Auntie surprised us with special additions. 3 apples and a small bottle of vodka. I went to the Haymarket, she said, referring to the hub of Leningrad's black market. A black market was kind of like people who sold things in a secret way, and it was called the black market. There was not a store with the label black market on it. It was kind of like what you would think of an underground railroad during the days of slavery. It was a secret way of purchasing things and trying to, get what they needed without the police finding out. I went to the Haymarket, she said, referring to the hub of Leningrad's black market, and traded a ruby ring that belonged to my grandmother for all of it. She said it proudly as my mother smoothed out the red tablecloth we used on special occasions and laid matching napkins next to our plates. A ruby ring, I exclaimed. But Auntie, she waved her hand at my protest. You can't eat gold or rubies. Our table looked festive. Auntie had brought down some of her animal figurines from her apartment. A bird, a bear, and a reindeer, all carved from wood. It made our centerpiece. I hadn't seen a flower since September, but my clever mother cut some bare tree branches and arranged them artfully in a narrow vase. Mama, I have a surprise for you, I said, my empty stomach growling at the thought of our special dinner. You do? She turned to smile at me. It was as if time stopped, and I captured the moment like I was a camera. My mother smiling, looking so happy. I've picked out some of your favorite songs, and Alik and I are going to play them for you after dinner. Misha says he's going to dance. She put down the spoon she was using to stir the soup, walked over to me, and gave me a hug so big it almost crushed me. When she pulled away, I could see there were tears in her eyes. My Ivan, she said, wiping away a tear. The not so terrible, I added. Auntie held up a plate of thinly sliced apples. What do you think? Oh, they look delicious, I said. The soup is hot, my mother said, reaching into her drawer for a ladle. Run next door and tell everyone dinner is ready. They were waiting for me. Mrs. Bukova wore a dark, loose dress for the occasion, and the hairnet that held her hair flat against her head when she worked was gone. Misha and Alik looked like she'd made them scrub their faces and put on clean shirts. I led them to our open door where Mrs. Bukova hesitated before entering when she saw our welcoming table. It's been a long time since I've seen something so beautiful, she said, motioning toward the table with its red cloth and decorations, not to mention apples. It's a special night, I said, one we all want to remember. Misha pulled his chair back from the table so enthusiastically that it fell backward onto the wooden floor. We laughed at the silliness of it. Out of the joy, I was sure we all felt being together. When we were seated, my mother picked up the small bottle of vodka and poured some into each of the adults' glasses. We boys had water. She raised her glass in a toast to friendship, to new beginnings, and to safe journeys. We clinked our glasses together, and for the next hour or so, we ate and talked and laughed and savored our special dinner. Even when we exchanged details of hardships, our shared experiences seemed to give us strength. This has been the happiest evening I've had for many months, Mrs. Bukova said. You know, she paused and looked down. I wanted to do something special for you, write a poem or, I don't know, something that would tell you how much I will miss you all. She pushed her chair back, stood up, and reached into her pocket of her dress. Pulling out a small square of paper and unfolding it, she said, I found out I can't write poems, although I tried for an hour. We laughed and watched her expectantly. However, she cleared her throat. I was able to write a letter. It's called Goodbye to Dear Friends. She covered her mouth with her left hand. I promise I won't cry. This was a side of my friend's no-nonsense mother I had never seen. It's all right, my mother assured her. Read it to us, Auntie exclaimed. Misha and Alik looked as excited as the rest of us to hear it. Mrs. Bukova glanced around the table at us, shook her head as if to clear it, and began. To dearest Elena, Vera, and Ivan, when I think of all the years we have known one another, I can hardly believe it. So many memories we have shared. Elena, how can I thank you for all the times you have watched one of my boys when the other one was sick? Remember when Alik had the chickenpox? Misha lived at your house for at least 2 weeks. I think even Ivan was ready for him to go home. We all laughed. And it was true. By the end, I had been a little tired of having Misha around all the time. She continued, such a good friend you have been in every way. I will miss having you right next door. Mrs. Bukova put her hand on her chest and breathed deeply. Vera, you have made a huge impact on my life. Do you remember when you lent me the Brothers Karamazov and I lied to you and told you I read it? That's a big, it's a Russian novel, and I probably didn't pronounce it correctly. The Brothers Karamazov. And it's a classic Russian novel that you can find in our library today, to be honest. Oh, yes, I remember, Auntie answered with a laugh. You guessed my secret. I couldn't read very well. With such patience, you helped me until I could read just as well as the next person. Thank you for changing my life. She rubbed her eyes quickly with her free hand because tears were forming. I couldn't stop staring at this rough, tender-hearted person. Ivan, she caught my eye and smiled. Sometimes I feel like you are my third son. And like my sons, you are a part angel and part devil. Alik and Misha couldn't have a better friend. Even when all I want is for you boys to be quiet and play nicely, I will dearly miss the sounds of laughter and fighting and your duets with Alik. Musical duets. Thank you, I murmured, almost wishing she'd finished so I wouldn't end up crying too. Alik, who was sitting next to me, reached out and put his hand on my shoulder, leaving it there as she continued. And so, she stopped as her voice quivered with emotion. I say goodbye to you, my dear friends. I have no doubt we will meet again. Alik and Misha and I will guard your empty apartments like they were our own until the day you return. She could hold back her tears no longer and held the paper up to her face. Covering it, as if to hide her sadness. My mother and Auntie hugged her and told her how touched they were by her words. The evening's not over, I said. To keep our night from ending on a sad note, we have a surprise for you. Alik ran to get his concertina and the tambourine from next door as I unpacked my concertina and warmed up a little bit. Music, Mrs. Bukova murmured, clasping her hands together. It's so late. When I get home, I rarely get to hear the boys play. On my last night with my mother and my friends, for who knows how long, we played all of our mother's favorite songs and every other tune we could remember. Most of them were well-known or traditional, and the 6 of us sang those together, often repeating verses just to relish the feeling of the song on our lips. Alik and I roamed around the room as we played, serenading Auntie and our mothers. Misha attempted the traditional Russian dance that demands that you squat down and then kick your legs out while squatting. He managed at least 4 kicks before he fell back onto the floor, but that didn't stop him from taking a bow or stop us from applauding him. The hours slipped away, and finally Mrs. Bukova said, we really must say goodnight. It's an early morning for us all. Looking around our apartment at my family and friends, I said something I think we all felt in our hearts. I wish I could make this night last forever. It was the closest I came to crying. Alik and Misha had made jokes earlier about coming with me to Uncle Boris's cabin, but I knew they would never leave their mother unless they were forced to. I wouldn't be leaving if I had a choice. When we said our last goodbyes and I closed the door behind them, I felt a deep sorrow and sense of loss. My mother must have seen it because a few minutes later she handed me an unwrapped box. It's a going-away present. I opened it slowly. It took me a minute to realize what it was. This is Papa's shaving kit. She nodded and smiled. I know you may not need it just yet, but you will soon. Whenever you use it, think of me. I will think of you and Papa every day, many times, every single day. We hugged each other for a long, long time before we went to sleep under the same roof for the last time. Whew. Well, it makes you stop and think and realize how lucky we are right now, even though, we think COVID's difficult. these times for these children and parents were so difficult. I'm looking forward to reading on, to seeing how Ivan manages to get to Uncle Boris's, and how Alik and Misha manage without Ivan. I think the writer, Randy Barrow, does a good job putting us right in the middle of the story, almost as if we were there. So it gives us a personal feeling of what it was like for families during these hard times. So, okay. Well, I'm looking forward to talking about it with you this week. I hope everyone's well and enjoys some of the sunshine today. Bye for now.